Well, thanks, Evan, and thanks for that introduction. And it's my pleasure to be with you tonight. I am in Florida, in Orlando, so it's quickly approaching my bedtime here. So I do promise to finish in about an hour. As Evan mentioned, he is one of our volunteer coaches, and I get most of the credit. But if it weren't for Evan and the other volunteer coaches like him, Wings for Widows would just be a good idea. Now we have over 100 coaches in 32 states, I think, and we will provide services to more than 1,000 widowed people this year. 2,000 is our goal for next year. And it's an honor to lead this organization and have the opportunity to work with great folks like Evan and other financial professionals around the country who have a heart for our mission. So if you have joined us tonight, you may be a widow or widower, and some of this will resonate very closely. And if that's the case, I'm so sorry for your loss. Maybe you've worked with them in your career, or maybe you just know someone who has been widowed. And the point is that we all know widowed people. My mom was a widow. And most of us, know someone that's been widowed, but we don't really spend a lot of time knowing them, right? We know very little about them as widowed people. We don't talk about it much. We don't even talk to them much, unless it's a family member, right? We feel sad for them and we know it's tough, but hey, they're going to be okay. They're going to bounce back. However, the more you work with them, and I've worked with hundreds now, you find out that this just isn't true. And in fact, the widowed community, which is about 7% of the US population, it's largely overlooked and definitely underserved. So my goal tonight is to share some of what I've learned over a career as a financial advisor and as the founder and current executive director of Wings for Widows. So everybody likes stories. So let me start with a story. This is John and Marie. They were happily married for 25 years. Out where you guys are, out there in California, and they were living their dream, right? They were living in their dream home. It was on a small equestrian property, and all three of their adult children were grown. But one of their sons, Jake, he was at home full time under Maria's care. He was severely disabled. While John was the family's sole income earner, he still was at home a ton, right, with Jake. And with Maria, he was an integral part of Jake's day-to-day life, and they were very close. So when John passed away suddenly in 2021 while just doing chores around the property, right, complete surprise, one of those unexpected deaths, Maria and Jake's worlds, they were shaken to the core. So now Maria, right, the sole caretaker of Jake, she's relying on Medicare and survivor benefits. And there was a modest life insurance policy from John. That was the family's only sources of income. And she quickly found herself, unable to keep up financially. And eventually their home's mortgage went into forbearance. And, Maria was starting to panic. She knew she needed to do something about her finances. But in addition to her own shock and grief, right, at the loss of her husband, her number one focus was getting Jake stabilized after losing his father. So in early 2022, Maria heard a podcast segment about Wings for Widows. And she thought that just maybe this could be what she needed. So she reached out to us, and she was paired with a financial coach, just like Evan. His name was Don. And Maria began meeting with Don, and they were taking inventory of all of her finances. And after accounting for the property's upkeep expenses and the mortgage and the cost of Jake's care, Maria and Don found that she was going to be short about $50,000 a year if she stayed in their current home. Well, it seems like a no-brainer, but selling your dream home and uprooting your children, right, that's a difficult decision for anyone. In Maria's case, Jake loved the horses, the property. Riding was therapy for him. It was so important for Jake. But in the end, Maria really, she struggled with what she knew she had to do. And ultimately, She realized that downsizing would allow her to pay off the mortgage. She'd get out of debt, and she could continue to stay home as as the caretaker for Jake, all without straining her finances. And Maria and Don also found that there would actually be enough money left over, properly invested, to pay for Jake's care for the rest of his life. So Maria said, I couldn't have done it without Dawn, right? In the end, I knew what I needed to do, and it really helped me move forward with such a hard decision. She said, the equestrian property was the dream for John and me, but now my dream is to be financially stable. So checking with Maria not too long ago, she's so thankful for Don, and I asked her what made Don special, right? He's a volunteer. I mean, not getting paid to help you. What made him special? And she said that he just loved the way that Don approached her situation. She said, I never had to be defensive about anything. Don wasn't judgmental, and therefore I could be open with him, and there was that trust was established. And he just asked that we would do the homework, and then we'd talk, with possible next steps. And she also told me, she hopes that more widows will reach out to Wings for Widows. She says, I tell everyone about Wings for Widows. They were what helped me move forward. You do have to be intentional and forthcoming and just face your situation head on, but Wings for Widows is there to help you get through it. So, Maria and John. So, Maria's story is just one of millions each year. So a little background on widowhood, the club that nobody wants to be any part of. On the screen, the highlights, right? There's a few stats I'm going to throw at you, and it's really just to create the framework about this population that is so misunderstood. So about 3,000 women a day, right, become widows every day in the U.S. It's like a jumbo jet crashing, right, every 4 hours. I mean, who talks about it? Nobody talks about it. There's 1.5 million new widows and widowers every year in the U.S. 70% of all married women will face widowhood. The average age of a widow is 59. I am sure before this, I said that. Maybe you knew it. But most believe that widows are much older than that, 59, which would say if that's the average, there's a whole lot of young folks who are becoming widowed, right? As well as the ones that just die of natural causes. And a widow will live on average about 15 years after the loss of her spouse. So often alone for another 15 years. Widows outnumber widowers 4-1. That's why we're Wings for Widows, not Wings for Widowers. We work with both men and women, but there are 4 times as many widows that come through our door. 80% of men die married, while 80% of women die single. That's pretty, I don't know, pretty shocking, really, when you think about that. More than half experience a sudden loss, like Maria did. No warning means no preparation, and just this massive crisis. Almost half of all widows earn less than $25,000 a year. What's the federal poverty line? About $25,000 a year. Widowhood is often a ticket to poverty. In fact, in the U.S., about 60% of the elderly poor women are widows. And that's not all. Modern Widows Club, probably never heard of it. They have chapters all over the country. They're a nonprofit that advocates for widows worldwide. They conducted a study a couple of years ago. It's some of the most recent information. It's on the screen. As you can see, widowhood impacts nearly all aspects of life. We're going to talk a little bit about finances tonight, but all aspects of life. Many must relocate. They've got to either enter or leave the workforce. They've got to find new health insurance, seek legal advice. And many must wrestle with anxiety, depression, or other mental or physical issues as a result of the loss. So clearly, just from this screen, you can see that the loss of a spouse can be crippling emotionally, physically, spiritually, socially, and especially financially. And that's what we're going to look at right now. So the reality is that personal and financial well-being, right, are linked together. They're intricately tied together, so that a life-changing event like widowhood has the potential to create some stress, right? Some real stress with long-term consequences. It turns out that losing a spouse is the most stressful experience in a lifetime. Number one, many folks think divorce is. No, divorce is number two behind losing a spouse. So let's look at the financial impact of losing a beloved spouse. So many spouses, right? Just makes sense. There would be some loss of income. If the exception is if the surviving spouse was the sole breadwinner. But if both are working, then a two-income family quickly becomes a one-income family. If both are receiving Social Security benefits, those benefits are going to decrease by about 40%. And nearly half have children living in the home at the time of loss. Think about it, if the average age is 59, that sort of makes sense. And as a single parent, which is it is the number one issue for widowers, being a single parent as a widower. For widows, there are other issues, mainly finances, but childcare costs are going to increase, and often that's significant, right? Without that second spouse, second parent. Nearly 1/3 are diagnosed with a new mental or physical health issue within 1 year of loss. Think about that. They may have COBRA benefits or benefits through their own employer if they're working, but what if they don't? They've got to get health care, and the cost of health care will likely increase if they're out there hunting for healthcare.gov or wherever they go. If they're over 65, their Medicare premiums will likely increase. You'll see that in an example. And their credit scores will likely decrease, which, if they need to borrow, increases the cost of borrowing, right? Their auto insurance premiums often increase, even with no basis for doing so. They could have the clean record, and the spouse could have had a worse record, and their premiums 9 times out of 10 are going to increase. The insurance company believes that spouses sharing the driving are safer than a single spouse. That's bad news. And then, finally, widows are subject to what we refer to as the widow tax. You may know it as the penalty tax, or you may not be familiar with it at all. But basically what occurs in most cases is that even though there is a loss of income, as I've just pointed out, the taxes don't decrease. In fact, they increase, which isn't what you would expect. So let's look at an example. I want to tell you about Roberto and Dorothy. They retired. Roberto was 72, Dorothy 70. And Roberto was an accountant, and Dorothy was a nurse. They did very well. They had, I think it was 6 children, all adults at this point. And Robert's health began to, decline after retiring almost immediately, as unfortunately often is the case. And Dorothy literally spent the last 2 years of his life taking care of him until he passed away in December of 2019. So in 2019, you can see here that what their financial situation looked like. There was about $100,000 coming in from their combined IRAs. Roberto was drawing a benefit from Social Security of $30,000. Dorothy a benefit of $20,000, and which gave a total income of $150,000. I think most of us would feel a retiring couple earning $150,000, probably pretty good shape. The tax on that, federal, they live in Florida. I didn't mention that, but in the Sunshine State here. So just federal tax, that was $17,700. And again, no state tax, right? Well, what changed for Dorothy, now a widow, in 2020? So you can see that because there were no minor children, Dorothy's filing status changes to single. The income from the IRAs was still $100,000, but Roberto's benefit, of course, dropped to 0. Dorothy's Social Security benefit got that spousal step up to meet the maximum of the 2, which was Roberto's $30,000. So she got a step up to $30,000. So the total income dropped to $130,000, and yet filing single, On 130,000, federal taxes increased to 21,300. So, summarizing the widow tax, there was a loss of income of $20,000, an increase in taxes of $3,600, and not part of this equation, but in this case, Medicare premiums increased $1,735 based on the additional costs of Part C and D and some other expenses in their case. So that's the widow tax. It's unfair, and in my opinion, a pretty bad deal for widowed people. So I promise this is the last slide with stats, and then I will have provided the framework for literally the condition in which a widow arrives at our front doors. Okay. When I refer to widow, I also mean to include widowers, but again, I mean both. So, while death's inevitable, and I'm sure you've seen this in your lives, few are prepared for the loss of a spouse. We just don't talk about end of life in this country, and it's often a surprise. And these statistics would bear that, confirm that. New Age, the retirement group, you may be familiar with them in Merrill Lynch. They did some research a few years ago, 2018, I guess at this point. And it was pretty significant research. And more than half of the widowed people they surveyed said that they had no plan in place for what to do if one of them died. No plan. I think that number is actually a lot higher. If you include insufficient planning, it's probably 80%. Only 14% were making financial decisions by themselves before they became widowed. Well, that means that 86%, almost 9 out of 10, are now making financial decisions on their own for the first time. That can be terrifying and paralyzing for many. If you've never driven a car and you're told you've got to drive somewhere, that would be an analogy that is pretty fitting. In fact, almost 70% said becoming the sole financial decision maker was the top financial challenge of widowhood. The top 70%. And when you realize that about 70% of all US adults do not have a financial advisor, let alone a professional network, you can see why about 70% said, that was the toughest thing I had to do. I was suddenly on my own. I didn't have professional advice, and I'm supposed to work through all this stuff. So if there are over a million men and women, 1.5 million, that means there's at least 700,000 to 1 million who do not have a source for trusted advice when they need it the most. That is the bottom line. And that's why I founded Wings for Widows, right? When I became aware of these numbers, I knew that we needed to be able to connect those in need with someone that could provide the advice, had the knowledge that they could trust. It was just that simple. So how did it begin? Well, this is David and Leanne Lorian. It actually began in 2017. Dave Lorian was a colleague of mine. We both ended up at Ameriprise Financial. And we literally were, our offices were next to each other. We became friends. And we had a sunset agreement between us. And then he died that was in 2014. And then we had become close friends, and he died in 2017. Unexpectedly of a heart attack. He was coming back. It was Super Bowl Sunday. He was coming back from Costco with the munchies for a party and collapsed at the door with the groceries still in the car when Leanne found him. So I inherited Dave's wife, Leanne, pictured here, and her family. They had adult children as clients. I worked with Leanne the rest of that year, putting her financial affairs in order. And, she was making great progress, and kind of no surprise, given her husband was a financial advisor from Raymond James and Ameriprise. So, they were in pretty good shape, but, she was still wrestling with state settlement and all those things. So we worked together as advisor and client. But she mentioned to me in the fall that some of her widowed friends from Grief Share, by then she had joined a Grief Share group, they were struggling with financial issues, and she asked if I would talk to them. So a few weeks later, I met with her friends at brunch at her house, and I listened to their stories, and we laughed and we cried, and I could feel their pain when they were talking about their loss and their pain. And some of these folks have been widowed for a couple of years.
Wait for dinner.
We're going to try to mute you, hon. All right. And so again, just in this conversation, and I was there for several hours, just listening to them kind of pour their hearts out. And whether they had a financial advisor or not, they all had questions. They all needed advice. Questions, like really simple ones, weren't being addressed. I thought that was so strange. Like, why wouldn't their advisor help them? Are you talking to your advisor? I later found out that they don't talk to their advisor about the questions that matter the most. They talk to one another in grief share, because that's where the bond is. That's where the trust is, right? Kind of an interesting, well, please don't get, in fact, the very first article I ever wrote was, don't go to your grief share buddies for advice. They know their experience, but they don't know what's right for you. So, and that all came from this experience. So anyway, I left there vowing to help them. I was going to ride in on my white horse and get them all the help they needed. Certainly there are some nonprofits out there that could be helpful. And so over the next few weeks, it was over the holidays about this time, and I was scouring the internet, and I called county and state agencies, and I explored AARP and USAA and about every other place I could think of, and just looking for any place that would have, maybe pro bono assistance to widowed people. The more I looked, the more I researched, the clearer it became there was nothing available to help Leanne's friends. Nothing. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, what am I missing here? How could this be so overlooked? And I really, at that moment, kind of realized that, what were they supposed to do? Maybe what was I supposed to do? I remember telling my wife, Susie, at some point, I said, if I don't help them, who will? And I guess the rest, as they say, is history. So as Evan said, I retired from Ameriprise last June. Can't believe it's been that long already. And I became the first paid CEO of Wings for Widows. It sounds fancy, but they don't pay me squat. We're still a young organization. And if you have money to donate after AAII, you can throw it our way too. No problems with that. But so that's the story of how we got started. And really my thought process was pretty simple, right? I'm no rocket scientist, but I was smart enough to think that if we could just give a client, a coach, somebody with the knowledge and a roadmap, we could change the trajectory of that journey, that widowhood journey, and maybe, hopefully, that destination, right? And that's what we did in 2018. And the only difference today is that we now conduct all coaching virtually. Of course, we've gotten a little more sophisticated, but that's what it's all about. So there are more than 1.5 million nonprofits in the U.S. today, and Wings for Widows is still the only public charity in the country that provides this type of service: one-on-one financial coaching, education for widows and widowers nationwide for free. No cost. That's right. We don't charge for any of our services. And as long as your donations roll in, kidding, we never will have to. And that's the whole point. We just don't want to have to charge people. Some research was done showing that the cost of the services that we're providing these folks is akin to about $2,300 of financial planning cost. That's a nationwide average from NAPA. And I think that's pretty cool that we're providing that service at no charge. It's kind of amazing, really. So, our vision's expanded from the early days, and we continually develop new resources and services that people need. As we get smarter and smarter about what we do, it's about getting them smarter so they make good financial decisions. They avoid costly mistakes, wherever they are in their journey. And so, we continue to expand operations and services, but, that's where that's what we do. I guess one way to, sorry about that. I moved a slide ahead. One of the ways to think about it is as like the emergency room. It was on Evan's slide, right? Wings for Widows, the emergency room for newly widowed, right? And it's kind of a good analogy, right? If you experience a medical trauma at home, you're going to visit the ER, right? You're not going to try to fix a broken arm, right? Or stitch yourself up. You're going to get to the ER. You're going to see somebody with experience, someone you can trust to take care of you in this crisis. And likewise, we feel that when you lose a spouse, it is wise to get professional help, whether that's us or an attorney or an advisor, right? Get some professional help. Financial trauma could be the loss of income, like we talked about, moving into more affordable housing or moving in with relatives. We see that a lot. Putting children into different schools or going back to work and all the rest. It is a stressor. And it's trauma. That's why we call it trauma. It's financial trauma. It's disruptive. It quickly injects chaos into a already confusing, upside down, stressful world filled with nothing but uncertainty. So Wings for Widows, we don't establish long-term relationships with clients. That's not who we are, right? That's why we don't compete with financial advisors anywhere. We stop the bleeding. We patch them up. We give them a prescription and a recovery plan, and then we check in with them periodically to ensure that they're healing, pretty much like a visit to the ER. So in that light, we strongly believe in two fundamental things because they are true. Not everybody knows this or believes this or will agree with me, but number one, financial trauma needs to be treated before emotional trauma. And we know this is true because Maslow, if you think back to his hierarchy of needs, he proved this years ago, right? And an easy example, right? There's no way that a widow or widower with young children at home is more concerned about their own mental well-being over having food on the table and a roof over the kids' heads, right? First things first. And number two, we've learned that widowed people shouldn't go it alone. Absolutely, this is a time for professionals, paid or unpaid. They don't know what they don't know. And as a result, when we see it all the time, they get into trouble and they make costly mistakes. And, it's really not their fault, right? If they've never lost a spouse before, how could you possibly know what steps to take and what missteps to avoid? I have yet to find a client who has Googled their way to success. There are plenty of well-written books out there, but they were meant for you and me, not for someone in distress. Nobody's going to read a 300-page book, to a positive outcome. So we're the best thing out there. And, until we arrived, this is where our clients turned, right? These are traditional sources for hope and guidance. No surprises here. But how many of these resources can offer financial advice and guidance? Who is going to treat their financial trauma? Who's experienced to treat their financial trauma? Okay. So even widowed people, frankly, even widowed people who, let's say, were managing the household finances before the loss, even those folks with an understanding, they are less able to make important decisions due to the shock of the loss, the overwhelming grief that comes with that, and what's known as widow fog. It's like it accompanies death, it accompanies grief. It leaves most newly widowed struggling to understand just about everything. So again, without professional help, there is a high probability that they will make mistakes that will cost them money. And for many that we work with, many who cannot afford to lose any money. So let's take Maria from the story. What are the challenges? What are they dealing with? Maria is not the same person after losing her husband, John, that she was before losing John. To you and I, she looks like Maria, but in addition to the loss of her life partner, her entire support system, everything she knew, all their plans for the future, in addition to that loss, she's struggling with all these new challenges. I've just listed a few of them on the screen here, right? And these are challenges that every newly widowed person every newly widowed person, man or woman, doesn't matter, experience at some level. Why? Well, fear. Mainly, they behave out of a sense of fear. And this is due to a complete lack of clarity about their, current situation, post-loss, and a complete and utter uncertainty about their future. That's it. Those two drive about 90% of the fear and about 90% of the behavior. They are on this emotional roller coaster that's propelled by their fear and loss and this overwhelming grief. And I don't know how much you know about grief. I didn't poll you, but if you've lost a loved one, you know what I'm talking about. It's not something you get over. It's not something you move through. There's always part of your heart, right, that is grieving. It never, ever really evaporates, even if it lessens over time. It really never goes away. And in the beginning, it's just so unpredictable that one never knows when grief is just going to wash over them. It's usually triggered by a memory or a song or a place or literally just about anything. So for many, grief has to be put on hold, as I just mentioned, to take care of children, to move, put the home up for sale, find a job, go back to work. But eventually grief has to be dealt with. So a powerful, powerful emotion. And I mentioned the widow brain or widow fog. They're used interchangeably, and it's real. It's a physiological outcome resulting from trauma. It's the way the mind works. It goes numb, and it's what it does to try to protect us with such grief. Forgetfulness, inability to focus, irritability, fatigue, irrationality. A lot of that's the fear, but even nausea. So all of these emotions and widow fog, right after, usually it can last for up to a couple of years. It's worse in the first 6 months, which is why we often won't work with anybody right away. We do an intake. And if they're not ready to work with us, we just say, let's hold off. You're not ready. But it does make all of these symptoms make it really hard to work with somebody with their finances, with our coaches. So it's something our coaches have to deal with. And we, again, do an intake, we screen them, and before the coaches ever see them, to make sure that they're in a state of mind that they can actually work with the coach. So again, as I mentioned before, they may be working with their personal finances for the first time. We mentioned that 86% are. So it's all new. It's all overwhelming. Short attention span, really hard to learn, really hard to focus. And the widowed, they don't want to feel dumb. They don't want to feel judged, like in Maria's case, right? She wasn't judged. That was the most important thing to her, with Dawn. And the widowed people are afraid, especially men, are afraid of looking dumb or embarrassed about what they don't know or what they can't understand. They don't want to look stupid, and they don't want to be judged. And especially guys who may have been at the helm with finances, and if things are bad, then they're embarrassed about that. And so our coaches, have to work through all of these emotions, as well as during COVID, it was so hard on our widowed clients, right? Being alone, being isolated, and literally forgotten. And this grates on self-esteem and leads to depression, which was rampant during COVID. It's estimated that about 15% experience serious depression in the first year of loss, about 10% in the second year. So very real. And finally, the single parent, transitioning from 2 to 1 means that Maria, again, is now, right, a single parent with Jake. That's her full-time, job. All the responsibilities that were shared together with John are now the full-time job of one. And how difficult would that be if she had to have gone back to work? So it worked out really well, right? She had a great outcome. But the bottom line here with these challenges and what I've explained is that regardless of age and regardless of assets, frankly, doesn't matter how much money they have, The newly widowed, they're a hot mess when they come to us, very much. So it's quite challenging for our coaches. Let's talk about our coaches, right? By now you have a really good idea about our clients. I hope you do. And I hope that you understand a widowed person, especially a newly widowed person, maybe a little more clearly now what they're going through. It's part of my job, right, as an advocate to share what they go through. But let me talk about coaches because, as Evan said, he's one, and we could not do what we do without our volunteer coaches. So, how do we work with our clients? Beginning with our financial coaching program, it is at the core of everything we do. We have got more than 100 coaches, I said. I think it's 32 states now. They all hold their CFP credentials. We only recruit CFPs. We used to have kind of whoever we could get, and I could compare. I used to sit on a lot of those. Man, there was a difference. There was really a difference. That training and really using financial planning as a cornerstone really makes a big difference in working with them. So I decided pretty early on that we were only going to use CFP advisors. They all apply to us through the Foundation for Financial Planning, which is the 501c3 arm of the CFP board. They all complete our orientation course. They also complete courses through the Foundation for Financial Planning. It's several hours now of orientation. It's changed since Evan came through. He's lucky. We've beefed that up. All receive and are expected to use the Widow's Guidebook, which I'll touch on in a minute. And then we have several training sessions throughout the year. We call them affectionately our Coaches Corner. We try to get all the coaches together, share some news, best practices, some good ideas, and a little bit of networking. And we do that a few times a year. Okay, let's see. I mentioned the guide. So here's the guide. This is the second edition. So I did an update to it last fall about this time, and we were able to start using it in January. And so I wrote it. I got some help, some folks at least to get some eyes on it the second time. It went from 165 pages to 245 pages, expanded quite a bit, and I'm pretty proud of it. And the coaches, the feedback we get, and especially from the clients really, really love it. I call it our roadmap. It's the #1 tool and resource that we use, and we use it as that roadmap. Our both coach and client, they're expected to know it and to follow it. And it contains 13 progress checklists. They're expected to hit every one of those checklists so we can provide a very consistent level of education and discovery with our clients. And again, it's great for the coaches because they don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just they have the book, become familiar with it. Really, everything they need to know, if they don't know it, is in the book. And then when the engagement's over, the book is available, right? The clients have one, and it's a great resource for them, when they're all done with the coaching. So what's it look like? What's Evan doing for us? So let me explain what happens after the after the client's paired with the coach. The first session is scheduled, and you can see here our process: session 1, 2, 3, and 4. They typically work with their coach for about 4 sessions, 90 minutes. We leave it to the coach, but usually about an hour and a half. And that's a lot of material to cover in 90 minutes. And they do this over a few weeks. Usually it's a few months. We call this whole cycle an engagement. And the client's length of participation, it varies, but usually it takes about 2 months, sometimes longer, sometimes if they're squared away, right, a little shorter. But the 4 sessions are, you can see them: get acquainted, followed by get organized, followed by get prioritized, and then get stabilized. And you can see that the topics that are kind of under those might be small, but you can see those. And there's 16 topic areas in all, 16 topics that we cover over these 4 90-minute sessions. So a lot of information. Without the guidebook, we'd be all over the map. So again, really, really helpful a tool. And as I mentioned, we use the progress check to ensure a universally, consistent, high level experience for our clients. And then we just hired this year a client experience manager. Really happy about that because it's changing the way we do some business, but they oversee the client cycle from the very beginning to the very end. And then at the end, if there's more work to do with the client, then that person will help them with resources and referrals and help them, get the resources they need. And so they complement what the work that the coaches have already done. So it's pretty neat. And then once the engagement ends, we receive an outcome report from the coach and a survey from the client. We learn about their experiences with one another and with Wings for Widows. And we have processes in place as well to monitor the performance of our coaches and the quality of the coaching our clients are receiving. So the favorite part of my job is getting to see those reports and reaffirming or confirming day after day that we are changing lives. It is so heartwarming. Our entire team, takes ownership of the success, but really it comes down to the coach and the client and the work that they do together. We do have an education program at Wings for Widows, but it works alongside our financial coaching program. We provide webinars and workshops and resources, but it's really to support our financial coaching program. It is our bread and butter, and it's the DNA of who we are. It's what we do. It's what we do best, and we're the only ones doing it, right? So these are the benefits that are realized, and we knew we were doing good things, but it wasn't until I really had to create this slide that I kind of was able to articulate kind of all the stuff that we do for our clients. And so I share this with you. I won't run through every one of these, but these benefits are life-changing. And I say that a lot because we see it a lot. Guess that's right, why you hear it a lot. This testimonial that I flipped to here, Joe, this is Joe Nelson. I can use her name. She speaks for us all the time. This is her testimonial. It's a nice soundbite, but her story is something. She shares it regularly. And I was Joe's coach back in 2021. Unfortunately, I don't get the privilege of coaching anymore. I just don't, other than some, a case or two here and there, but not like I used to. And Joe was assigned to me, and we worked together. Her husband, Kyle, got cancer, and her story is really fighting for Kyle's life and spending absolutely every nickel they had. The prognosis was never good, but it's just a testimonial about, right, we're never willing to give up on someone we love. And unfortunately, it put them in such serious debt. They expended all their retirement savings, everything they had. They actually were playing an insurance shell game at work, lost work, were fired, lost insurance, got insurance, lost insurance. It was a nightmare for this family for 2 years. And eventually they lost that battle. And I met Joe after she really ran out of ideas, was facing her own foreclosure. She's a realtor, and was left with a $250,000 medical bill that she could not pay, all to try to save Kyle. So I worked with her. We worked through a lot of different areas, but I helped her reduce her debt, advocated for her with that debt, and we got that reduced to $23,000 and a payment plan. So, working with Joe literally changed her life, and it really was. I remember it was in August when I got her email saying that they had forgiven her outstanding debt except for the $23,000. But that's why we say when life changes, we change lives. Today, Joe is a successful realtor, and she's a member of our board of directors. So You can read about, more testimonials on our website here. I would say that quality is the hallmark of Wings for Widows. We try to do it right, except for technology. Sometimes we don't get that right, but or don't do it all. I mean, we really, from high caliber coaches to our marketing to our training, we continually strive to try to do the things the right way and for the right reasons. So we set the bar high, and the clients seem to like what we offer and how we offer it. So now that you've learned about our clients, our coaches, and you've seen our financial coaching program, how does it all work? What's the process? How do we pull it all together? And you can see that here on the screen. It begins with the client finding us, our website or contacting us. And then most of our referrals, we get asked this all the time, most of our referrals come from our online searches. They'll complete a short form and we'll complete it. And then they'll schedule a meeting with one of our volunteer care managers, our front line, right in the trenches, the very first human contact with someone who's looking for help. So based on the needs and the priorities of the client, the care manager will figure out if they need to move down the pipeline towards our coaching program or be directed to a resource manager, for help with other areas, other non-financial areas where they might need help. That's the dotted line. And if financial coaching is the best course of option, and it usually is, then the client will then complete the financial wellness check questionnaire. And this serves two purposes. We've been collecting this information for a long time. It actually serves more than two, but they receive a financial wellness score. So somebody that's in financial turmoil to get kind of a score, kind of cool. And what is it? It's a comparative score that reflects how well they are progressing since the loss compared to others like them. Pretty cool algorithm we built several years ago. And so they get this score, tells them a little bit about where they are, but that score and all that information that they completed also goes to our coach along with the care manager notes, so that the coach, once paired with this client, has a really good overview of the client's situation and their concerns before they ever begin working together. The other thing we do is we collect all that data, and it's all proprietary data, and we can slice and dice it about 1 million ways. And we'll be doing research articles, publishing research next year using that data. So we're pretty excited about what we're building behind the scenes. But that's why we use it. And then so now the coach has that information. They're all ready to go. When they're paired with their coach, it's usually in the same state or time zone at least. And then the coach will contact the client and they begin their engagement, which you saw that process earlier. Once that engagement's completed, our resources manager, as I said, they'll follow up with them, see if they need referrals or some other assistance. And then finally, we continue to follow up with the client with, for months afterwards, doing check-ins, monthly newsletters, invitation to join our private Facebook group, and much more. And so, much like the ER that stays in touch and makes sure you're doing okay. So they have to find us to work with us. And so you might be wondering what we do, how we do this, how do people find us? It's a often asked question. And you can see here, we rely on a full portfolio of advertising and marketing products to raise awareness about our services. And really, it's all about driving people to our website, which is actually in a redesign right now. We'll be rolling out a brand new website first quarter next year. But we rely heavily on Google and digital marketing. As I said, most of our referrals are online. And fortunately, we've been the recipient of a Google ad grant. So all of our Google advertising is free. Thank goodness. So that's how that's done. Again, we produce a lot of this as much as we can in-house, but we do have a marketing agency and other consultants we use for the rest. But I will leave this with you. As you know, the best form of advertising is word of mouth. And our volunteers, our coaches, and folks just like you, now that you know about us, right, you can help spread the word. If you come across someone in need, you know who we are. Okay, so I'll wrap up tonight. with this slide that I thought that you might find interesting. I think actually Evan asked me to come up with this slide. And it's like, what have you learned through all this, Chris? What do you know? And I would say that after 6 years in the trenches, this is what we've learned about death, and in particular, those we leave behind, which is why I wrote this book. On the left side was one of the books I wrote in 2020. And it is available on Amazon. Shameless plug, I guess. But look, at spouses don't talk enough. If you're a spouse, talk to your spouse. Talk about end of life. Get your affairs in order. Don't leave it to them. Oh my gosh. Spouses aren't organized. Get organized together. Talk and get organized. That's about half the battle when someone passes, to be organized and to have a plan, to actually discuss these things. And all these topics you should discuss are in the book to your left. Share passwords for surviving folks that are always on a hunt for a password, or how do I get into this, or how do I find this? Share your passwords with your loved ones. Medical bills, they are a shared responsibility. I have so many clients that believe that when you run up a $250,000 medical bill, that it dies with the spouse. If the spouse dies, it does not. The surviving spouse inherits that. There are ways around that. We're not going to talk about that tonight. But medical bills are a shared responsibility. Estate planning is a must. Have a good estate planning attorney. Get those estate documents in place. That's about another 25% of the battle, right? Have that plan, talk about it, and get that document in place. And then term insurance. Man, if all you have is term insurance, it cures about 99% of the ills that we see for survivors. It's just 70% of U.S. adults are underinsured or uninsured. You may have heard that statistic. I think it's the most recent was 80%. Nobody's buying insurance anymore. Crazy. You should buy it for your surviving spouse. It would cure so many ills of those we work with. Spouses should attend meetings together with their professionals. I encourage it. When I guess about 5 years before I retired, I started demanding that my clients come together, don't come at all. And I started that in COVID, during COVID, when you're on the screen, where's Barbara, right? Get Barbara over. Nope, call me back when I was kind of not very nice about that. And it's because of this, is that, right, 70% of widowed folks in the first 2 years of a loss will leave their advisor or professional because they have no relationship with them. I want to make sure that both spouses had a relationship with me should anything happen. And I had at least 1 or 2 deaths every year. So it's a great policy. They should be attending meetings together and be on the same page. And then, do some legacy planning, do some end of life planning. One of my quotes is, preparing for end of life is a heroic act of selfless love. You love your spouse, make sure that, right, that the nicest thing they can say about you is, thank God that we did this planning, and that I'm not, I can grieve. I don't have to go look where my next meal is going to come from. So, gosh, I guess I would leave you with that idea, right? Preparing for end of life is so important. So with that, I finished with 1 minute to spare, Evan. And I would say that is my presentation for this evening. I hope it was helpful.
I think it was very helpful. An awful lot of what you said, I can back up from my experience from talking with people. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so let me get to those. Oh, okay. Let's see. Excellent, well laid out and informative presentation, Chris. That's a good one. Thank you for founding this much needed advocacy service. You and the coaches are doing God's work. Props to Wings for Widows. Have a Merry Christmas and a great New Year. Well,
thank you.
I would agree with that. The other question that came in at the beginning, will the presentation be recorded and available for later viewing? And somebody asked, I thought, about the PowerPoints. So you're going to have the recording And as I understand it, you'll be able to forward that to me, and we'll post it on the AAII LA website, right?
Yeah. So what I do is when we're all done, I'll wrap this up. I'll shoot it up to YouTube, and I'll shoot you a link, and it'll be open to.
Oh, okay. A
It'll
link
be
is
open.
good.
You can just drop that link right into your site, and up should pop a YouTube, or you can embed it. There's a couple of ways you can do it. I can help you with that, Evan, but I will definitely get you the
Oh,
link.
okay.
Yeah.
Here's one. Can my wife meet with a coach before I die? This way she will be better prepared when I die.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not the first time we've been asked that. And sadly, the answer is no. Um, but the book's only $19 on Amazon, and that's what you need to talk about and work through to be better prepared. And there's again, I'm 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 referring to my book, but there are many books out there, and there's free lists out there. Just Google "preparing for end of life," and there'll be all kinds of things you can download and work through. It's not really, the work that we do, our coaches do. Really, it's about working through the rationale of it. There's a lot we do that would not apply. It seems like it would, but really the best way is to do it from the other direction and work together and think through what these books and lists lead you through, so that you can get that dialogue going and make some of these decisions, whether that's property ownership, titling, all those sorts of things that get folks in trouble. They're in my book, and they're in other books. So that would be a better use of your time.
Yeah.
But it's a great question.
Okay. But I'll put a plug in on January 6th next year. We'll be meeting at the Skirball Center, where we used to meet before COVID. We're trying to go back and meet in person. And one of our speakers will be an estate attorney who's going to talk about some of these same issues and preparing, as well as an investment advisor for those of you who will be leaving a legacy to your family, how to keep it from tearing your family apart. So there are some things you can do beforehand, even if it's just making a list of passwords and accounts and whatever. So your beneficiary doesn't walk into the bank and find out that you have 3 checking accounts that he or she has never heard of before.
Yeah. And most of these books, Evan, right, walk through all of those types of questions and those areas that get overlooked. That's why I wrote it, because on this side I was seeing so much misery. I said, and that was only 18 and 19. So, right, 2018 and 19, I saw enough to realize that nobody was doing the proper planning, which is why I decided to write the book in 2019. It didn't actually hit Amazon until April of 2020. I did not know we would be in the middle of a pandemic, so it was good timing on my part, and it became an Amazon international bestseller. But it's just so necessary to have a guide to work through those discussions. So thanks for the plug, Evan.
Okay. Well, I guess it's time to let Chris go, and you've reached the age like me where you go to bed early. So, Chris, thank you so much. Great organization. If you know anybody who's been recently widowed, have them contact Wings for Widows. Even if they think they've got everything under control, it's a good sounding board, and people can help you with things that you hadn't thought of, and you won't feel so isolated. So, Chris, thank you so much.
Thanks, Evan.
And have a good holiday season. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, everybody. We'll see you at the Skirball, I hope, in January. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night. I guess we